Hi everyone, this is the first workshop for Justice Ends and Means for term two, and I'm here by myself. So we'll have to figure out in the next couple of weeks what we're going to do going ahead in terms of workshops, and see if there are better options for you guys than this time. Maybe an evening would be better for you, maybe intensive workshops where we do them once a month, but we do them over a longer period. Whatever, I'll send a survey out to you and ask some questions. That being said, there's only 5 students enrolled in this unit. It's very small because of the dismantling of the Bachelor of Criminology degree. This is a core unit in the Bachelor of Criminology, which was discontinued. Um, but nevertheless, there should be an intake of students in the Bachelor of Science, Criminology and Psychology who should also be required to do this unit. So I'm not sure what's going on that the numbers are so low, but it does give us a lot more flexibility with the way in which we offer the unit, and it also gives you more of an opportunity to get one of the best staff student ratios that you can get in the business. So this first workshop is generally spent talking about the assessment, where we're going, what we're doing, and give you guys a chance to ask questions. Obviously, that's not going to happen this time. So I'll talk a little bit about the assessment, and then I will give you an opportunity to ask questions on Teams, which is probably the best way for you to ask questions and get answers. So this unit is offered in the flipped classroom style, as is all the criminology units in the Crim Psych degree. And there's that involves some short mini lectures to introduce you to the units, your readings and your independent work beforehand. And then we have exercises to do in the workshops. And from those exercises, there's a workbook exercise where you write up a report on what happened. And there are some questions each week. There are some reflective seeds to get you going in terms of what you do in your report. You don't pick all of them, you just pick one, or you pick a question of your own, and it's basically you demonstrating what you've learned that week and talking about what came out of the exercises and what came out of your understanding of the topic for that week. So I think there's 5. Let me double check how many that you hand in at the end at 6. You submit 6 at the end of the term. If you're concerned about that exercise, I will let people submit things, workshops, some of their workshops early in week 5 to get feedback then. If you want to do that, that's an option. You're not required to, but that's if people are thinking, I'm not sure if I'm on the right page. Can I get some marked early? We don't have a way of doing that through Moodle. So that's really a case of you emailing me your exercises that you've done and handling it that way. Honestly, with 5 students, it's going to be very easy to deal with that. It would be more difficult if there were 100 students in the unit to do that with. So if you've done that sort of exercise before, you know what to expect. If you haven't, good time to be asking questions on Teams and to let me know what you need, what answers you need answering. But basically, these exercises is to keep you engaged from week to week and to get you to think about what you're learning, and also to demonstrate what you're learning, because we can't sort of open up your skull and see what you're learning in your brain. A reflective exercise is a way of you describing your learning process to us so that it makes sense to us. All right. And there is a link in the materials to an example of a worked example of a workbook as well. It's from another unit, but you'll get the idea. So that's the first assessment task. The other 2 parts are a selection of quizzes and a problem-solving assignment. Quizzes, you probably know the format by now. There are 3 quizzes. The first one is what we call formative assessment, which means it's not counted towards grades. Summative is assessment that counts towards grades in the jargon. And the first one is just to give you some early feedback and for me to get some feedback on what everyone's doing, where they're going, and for you to get some feedback on how well you've understood that work. So that becomes available next week, and it covers all the readings from week 1. So the first quiz is just on that basic first week's material, and it is to give you an opportunity to make sure you understand how the quiz system works, because there's nothing worse than going to a quiz when you've never done one with that system before, and being nervous about it. So you've used the system, you understand, and also to understand the kinds of questions I'm asking, because the questions will require you to think about what you've read and to apply your knowledge. So some people go into quizzes expecting it's a direct answer to a question, i.e. something that you could just Google. And that's obviously a pointless exercise to give you a question that you could just Google the answer to. So the questions we ask are ones that require you to apply your knowledge and think about it. But that first quiz will give you an opportunity to experience that with no risk involved, because it's purely giving you feedback. The ones that are worth grades, the other two are worth 15% each, and they occur in week 6 and week 11. But by that point, you'll know what the score is on quizzes and how they work. The third assessment task is a problem-solving assignment. Each week in this unit, we will be going through the question of what is justice from various different perspectives. Now, a few of them are going to be perspectives from within the legal system and what lawyers think about justice, but we're not limited to that. We're also looking at philosophers, political ideas. We're looking at that idea of what is justice from different perspectives. So from your problem-solving assignment, it's to pick one or two. I think the classic way to answer this is to pick 2 different perspectives, to look at the problem and to compare what perspective A and perspective B have to say about that problem and what they would argue is the issue of justice involved there. Now, in week 8, I think, week 7, we'll run through a version of this in class. So the workshop for that week is to actually take a hypothetical problem-solving question from not the one you're going to have for your assignment, and to work through it, to work through those stages and to give those examples. So don't freak out about how to go about structuring it and writing it. There's no set format for any of this, by the way. So one of the questions students always ask is, do we have to do this? Do we have to do that? Do we have to have a cover page? I mean, I used to say you have to remember to put your name on it, but even these days, Moodle logs what your name is. So if you forget to put your name on it, we know that. So there's no margins or fonts, or just as long as it's readable. I know some people like double spacing and 1.5 spacing. I find as a reader, it makes it really hard to read things. And I find single spacing to be perfectly adequate for assignments. I think that idea goes back to the days when people handed in physical papers, and when you're going to put a comment on the paper, you handwrote in the gap between the lines. And that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, the rate of marking is such that you're not going to get a huge number of comments on your papers anyway, because just the sheer workload of marking is much more than it used to be. But also we use GradeMark, a PDF system where we can note up things on PDF. So it's all electronic, and it means that there is no physical need for those double spacing. And yeah, some people still insist on it. I think it's just out of habit. And as a personal preference, if you like double spacing and it's your thing, happy for you to do that. But my personal preference is that single spacing makes it very much easier to see the paragraph breaks. And that's a really core way in which you actually structure your work is in paragraphs. And I think that double spacing or 1.5 line spacing is actually making your work harder to read. harder to comprehend, and you want to make it as easy as you can for the marker to read. So that's not due until week 11. I will have the actual problem solving scenario out there to you soon. Once I get it, the one for this term figured out. I wanted to have a bit of a chat with you guys in terms of what your interests were before I said it. Maybe I'll put a question on Teams, and that'll be a good way. Because there's not much more point me setting a particular type of problem solving exercise that you guys are just not interested in. So I'll make a note of, I'll put a question on the assessment area in Teams saying, you know, what sort of things do you think you'd be interested in? What sort of fields? And I'll try and match something to what you folks are interested in, because you know, it's going to be easier to do with 5 people than it is with 150. All right. Now, in terms of the weekly structure, the unit is very much structured around active learning and active learning activities. Now, typically that would be done in these classrooms at 2 hours each week. Although, given the small numbers, even if we continue in this format, they'll probably be an hour rather than 2 hours, because these assignments, these challenges have been written with the idea that, you know, you've got 100 students, you break them into a whole lot of work subgroups, they all go into discussion groups, and then they come back and everyone shares their responses and we have a big group discussion. Obviously, if we only got one group, that shortens the process dramatically. So it may be that even with a small class like this going forward, that we would only need a week to get through the material, the materials as it is anyway. If you can't make this regular time, there's a few options. One is to organize a study group with at least one other person from the class who you can work it through. Or worst comes to worst, with someone who isn't in the class that you can work through it with. So you have someone that you've got that dialectical process where you can run ideas and discuss and think about things, because these things are much harder to do by yourself. Obviously, someone who understands the coursework and understands, you know, also done the readings, but understands these different concepts of justice is going to help you a lot more than just getting someone who doesn't, you know, is just well-intentioned, happy to talk to you, but doesn't know the technicalities of these different ideas. So that is another option. And if you want to organize a study group outside of the set hours or whatever, just put a message onto MS Teams and say, hey, I'm looking at getting a group together who's interested. You might even find one of the exercises, one of the things we're going to do this week is use Google Maps and put where we are on the map. And that's a good opportunity to see if someone might be in the same area as you. There might be someone who you can catch up with and, you know, on a weekly basis, work through the workshops. Or even if you know, again, you find you're doing it fortnightly or monthly and you went through a bulk of them, then there are all sorts of options. But anyway, your workbook assessment task is really based on going through those exercises, applying that knowledge and thinking about it. The 2 exercises for this week, it's not much point me going through them by myself, and they really are mostly the first one's a bit of an icebreaker activity, but it's an interesting one, and it's thinking about songs that are based around the themes of justice and coming up with a playlist of songs. And previously, students have found this really interesting, and it's also really interesting to look at other people's musical tastes and to think about the role that justice plays in our culture, and how things like protest songs and songs about injustice are very much a strong part of our tradition and our background, at least for about 100 years, and an important part of how we express our attitudes to these issues in culture. So it's a little bit of an icebreaker. It's not a very terribly serious task, but it has surprising depths in understanding, particularly the way different generations respond to issues of justice and injustice. You'll also see there are reflective seeds that are those starting points for you to write your reports. Don't try and answer them all. You're not confined to these. You can modify them. You can play around with them, whatever you like. But often when people come to these reflections on some practical work, it's hard to make the next step, and it's hard to go, oh, what do we do? What do we do with it now? Without saying, well, that I said this, then Bob said this, then Julie said this, then Bob said this, then Julie said this, then I said this. Those kind of blow by blow sort of reports. For this kind of reflective report, where you actually want to talk about what you learned out of the process, these are giving you some ideas to think about and to base your short report on. The other thing I want to bring up is the idea of your portfolio. There's plenty of materials there. There's some online materials to read through. But one of the things we're going to return to in this subject is that idea of building your portfolio as you go as a student, and having that as a key employability tool when you graduate. Now, no one's going to make you do this, but this is something that employers are very keen on seeing. And a portfolio is a collection of it's not just a CV as such, though you will have what your employment experiences are, but it's a collection of different forms of evidence for those things that employers want. So if you're working in a field that needs you to be able to write reports, then you'll have evidence of report writing, and you'll probably have plenty of opportunities to do that through your academic studies and your ability to add into your portfolio. Here's a report I've done, and you might note that this is what I've done, and part of the key parts of creating a portfolio is that notion of curation, that you don't just plonk something in and hope someone reads it. You also put in curation text, a bit like when you go to the museum and there's a little bit that says this lump of rusty metal was actually a dagger that was forged in Greece in 1102. No, that's way too recently. In the year 11. BCE, and it explains and contextualizes this artifact that you're looking at. You do the same thing with your portfolio. You say, this is a report I wrote for this subject. Why I think this, and this is a good example of my work, because if you look at page 5, I do a really good detailed breakdown of the issues and whatever. So the other thing we want to introduce with portfolios is that idea that it's not just like in the old days, people used to have those plastic folders with the clear plastic inserts, and you go along to an interview and you've got your swimming certificate and you've got every piece of crap that you'd ever been awarded in your life, and you plonk it down and whatever. A portfolio is much more focused, and that's because the way job interviews work now is almost universally through targeted criteria. So they say, to succeed in this job, you need to be able to do A, B, C, D, able to write reports, work in a team, do this and do that. And one of the things that a portfolio is really useful for is when you're writing a letter of application and when you're in a job interview situation, and they say, well, this job involves writing reports, you can say, there's an example of my report writing here, and this is a situation, and this is how I use my skills, and this is why you want to employ me. So this stuff just makes people much better prepared, and then hopefully preferred for in the job market. It's something that is very hard to work on at the end of the process. And I know everyone loves to do everything at the last minute, but it is much easier to work on gradually as you go through, which is why this term we try to get you set up with the basics. And even if, your area where you talk about teamwork, the best thing you've got as evidence of teamwork is when you're a teenager and you worked at McDonald's and you were a shift manager, then that's something you put in your portfolio. And then as you get better experiences, you replace it. You get better artifacts, you replace that in your portfolio. But at least you've got something there. And then you can curate that. So you can say, okay, here is my 5 years service certificate from McDonald's. And my curation is I worked as a supervisor for 3 of those 5 years. And an example in which my leadership was important is a situation where, Bob stuck his hand in the chip fryer and had to be rushed to hospital. And I had to organize someone to cover the shifts while the ambulance came and took Bob away, and I had to do this and I had to follow up and do, you know, whatever. There's a description, a curation description that's added to it that again tells that employer when they ask you that question, what can you tell me about your leadership skills? You can say, well, I'm put in a crisis. Here's an example of where there was a crisis, and this is how I responded to it. All right, we're going to come back throughout this term to this portfolio idea. There's some examples in this exercise of things to think about. And one of the things you're going to be working towards towards the end of the term is an ethos statement, which is basically your, this is who I am, this is what I believe statement. And many employers, some employers don't care, but many employers take this quite seriously because they want to have a good cultural fit between employees and the organization. And it's good to start working on this at an early stage. And a subject that's all about justice is also an excellent spot in which to, you know, discuss these and start thinking about, well, what is your attitude to justice? We're going to go through 10 or so different positions on justice this term and ways of thinking about justice. Where do you sit in that picture? All right, so that's pretty much most of what I had to say this for this workshop. I'll put some questions on Teams, put your own questions on Teams, and I'll send out a short survey for you to think about what you want to do going forward, and how you want to approach this subject. Because honestly, I'm here to do what is best for your learning and best for you to get the best outcomes. And I also don't want to sit here talking to myself for you know, it was only half an hour, but I still would rather not be sitting here talking to myself every week when we could be doing something much more productive. Okay, so catch up and let me know which way you want to go with this particular unit.